Okay, so this video is going to cover some um, Photoshop basics, just photo editing, scaling your image, and making a few adjustments. So if you open up Photoshop, you should see something like this. You can go over here on the left and click Create New, or maybe you'll see this menu automatically. And in here, there's a couple of options. Up at the top, you'll see we can go to Print or Web. Obviously, these sizes are going to be better for default sizes if you're going to print something out. Web is generally better for if you are presenting something on a screen or something like that. So for now, or default photo sizes. For now, I'm just going to click on any size. It doesn't matter. I'll just go to print and click on that first option, and then I'll go down here and click create. And we can always change the size later, so that's why it's not too important. So here we are in the document. So if I want to bring an image in, a photograph that I took, you can open new images in Photoshop by just going File Open, like if you have a JPEG from a camera, or you can click and drag stuff if you want to like place it into your document, and you'll see it actually scaled it so that it kind of roughly fits the size of my document. So just to give you a sense, if I drag this in and if I just drag it here, so it's not like in this file, but it's making a new file, or it's opening this file. So now you can see here, if we look up at the top and at the left at our rulers, and I think if you hit Control R, you can make the rulers appear and disappear. I think you can also find it under View, yeah, Rulers. And then if you right click on the ruler, it'll tell you what units it is, and you can change it if you want. And you can see that this image is pretty high resolution. So this is like 40 inches by almost 60 inches. And that's going to make a really pretty large file size. So we don't need it to be that resolution. So we can go ahead and we can scale it down first of all. So the general rule of thumb is you want to have about 150 pixels per inch or dots per inch for whatever it is you're doing. And that means that if you're going to edit this photo and then lay it out in a document that's, say, on an 8.5 by 11 or an 11 by 17, you want to kind of figure out how much real estate this image is going to take up on the page, and then work backwards from that to figure out what resolution it needs to be, so that it's not like a huge image. So in order to adjust the image size, I can go to let's see, image, and there's two options here. There's something called image size, and there's something called canvas size. So like I mentioned before, you can create a document with a particular size, and you can also adjust the size of the document. So for example, if I go to canvas size, and I can see here the exact size of my document. So it's 42 by 56 inches, much bigger than I need it to be. So if I adjust it so it's about 11 by 17, which is still much bigger than I really need it to be, but that's closer to what my final document is going to be. And it says here the new canvas size will be smaller than the current canvas. Some clipping will occur. Oh yeah. So if I do that, I think what actually happens is my image gets cropped. So in Photoshop, you can hit Control Z. You can also go Edit, Step Backwards. Control Z only works once. Then you have to hit Control Alt Z, or you can just go to Edit and keep going step backward. So over here on the right in my Layers panel, and if you don't have a Layers panel, you can go to Window up at the top and check Layers. Layers are pretty important in Photoshop. That's how you kind of put different images together and stuff like that. So right now, because we opened this image directly from the JPEG, you can see it says background, and on the right-hand side, it's like a little lock symbol, which means this is like a locked thing. If I try and do anything, like, for example, if I try and click and drag it, move it, it won't let me do that because it's locked. In order to unlock the image, I just double-click on that layer, and it's going to say new layer. I just click OK, and so now it's an unlocked layer, so it's a separate layer. And now if I move it around, you can see it moves independently of the canvas. So let's try adjusting the canvas size again. If I go to Image, canvas size. We'll make this 11 by 17. Now I believe, so it didn't actually, I mean, it cropped our image, but it didn't like delete things. So now we want to adjust the size of our image to match roughly the bounding of the document. So if you want to navigate in Photoshop, there's Control plus, hold Control on the keyboard and plus or minus to zoom in and out. You can also hold Control space, and you can see that creates the little, makes my icon into a zoom button. And then I'll click and drag and move my mouse to zoom in and out. So you'll see me do that a lot. That's the easiest way, I think, to navigate. And then, so what I want to do is I want to scale this image. So I have the image selected in my layers panel. There's a couple ways you can do it. You can go over on the left-hand side to where it says rectangular marquee tool, which looks like the little dashed line rectangle. Click on that guy, and then right-click on the image and select Free Transform. And so now you can see I have little grips, and I'm zoomed out enough so I can see the extents of the image. And if I click and drag one of those grips, I can rescale my image. Now, you can see I'm also distorting my image. I don't want to do that, right? Because it's a photo, I want to keep the proportions between the height and width constant. So if I, oops, it's messed up. Control, oops. So to undo that, I just hit escape because I transformed it in a way I didn't want to. Let's try that one more time. And then, so sorry, what I was saying was if you want to keep it proportional as you scale it, you hold Shift on the keyboard. And then you can see wherever I place my mouse, it keeps the height and width proportional. And I can also hold Alt on the keyboard, and that scales it around the center point rather than around the opposite corner. And so that allows me to keep it kind of centered in the document, roughly. And I can also then, once I do that, let go of my mouse and click it and move it around and place it wherever I want it. So let's say I want something like that. I'll press Enter to finish the free transform, to exit the free transform. Now let's say I want to crop my image. So I want to change the canvas so that it's the boundary around my image is more kind of positioned where I want it to be. So we can use the cropping tool for that. So over here on the left, it looks like two angles or two squares kind of overlapping each other. I'll click on that. That's the cropping tool. Didn't work for some reason. And so now I have a similar thing. I can click and drag and move around my at the corners. But what I'm actually doing is rather than resizing the image, I'm resizing the document. And up at the top, we have a couple options that we can use. If we want to set a specific dimension or a ratio between the height and width. So if I want it to be square, I can set it to be square and then kind of position my image so it's in the center of that square. And the same kind of rules apply as before. If I hold Shift, I can keep it proportional. Excuse me, I have to clear these boxes, or I can hit clear. So now I'm freely moving it. If I hold Shift, I can keep it proportional, and if I hold Alt, I can drag it, rescale it around a center. So there we go. Now I've cropped my document to my image, and I'll press Enter on the keyboard. And so now we have an image that's, oh yeah, and so that will actually, it looks like that will actually crop your image. So just be careful that it's what you want when you do that. Let's see, center this a little more. Okay, good. And now that I have my image resized and cropped to what I want it to be, I can make some adjustments to the image itself. So there's a couple ways to make adjustments. One of them, if you go under Image at the top and click on Adjustments, you have all these options for altering color balance and light and dark and doing various effects. But when you do it this way, it ends up being permanent. So like if I were to adjust the saturation to be really, really high, so I get tons of color. So as soon as I click OK, that adjustment has been applied to my image. I can't change it or alter how it's affecting my image anymore. And of course, I can go back, but I can only go back so many times. You know, if you do a bunch of work in Photoshop, it'll only save like the last 15 steps or something like that. So eventually, you'll lose the capacity to go back and change adjustments that you've made. So the other way to do it, which is the way that I like to do it, is over here in the Layers panel at the bottom. You can see it says Create New Fill, this little circle that's half light, half dark. It says Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer. And if I click on that guy, I have all the same options that I had up above where it was under Image Adjustments. So for example, if I wanted to make this image do the same thing, if I wanted to change the hue and saturation of my image, I could do that by making a new layer. So you can see that when I did that, I made a new layer. And the way that layers work in Photoshop is they're kind of like in order. So the higher they are in the list, that means they're in front of everything that's below them in the list. And the way that works with adjustments is it affects everything below it in the list, or it affects everything kind of downstream in the list. So if I click and drag this and put it, below my image, you'll see that it's no longer affecting the image. So that's kind of how layer ordering works. The other thing, if you wanted to, let me just delete that. All right, let me delete the layer. There we go. So if you wanted to adjust, let's say, the background independently of the object itself, I can make an adjustment. And so actually, first of all, let me make it black and white. I'll click on my black and white. And in here, I have a couple options, so I can make various tones lighter or darker. You can see that kind of affects the contrast of the image. Like I could bring up the shadow if I wanted to by adjusting the blues. I can adjust the color tones on the basket itself by adjusting like the yellows, the reds. Anyway, so we can always go back and play with that more later. So now let's say I want to adjust the background independently of the object. And I want to alter the, let's just say, brightness and contrast of the background. I'll make a brightness and contrast layer. So now you can see whatever I do, it's going to affect everything in the image. But if I didn't want to do that, if I wanted to make it affect just the background, I can use what's called a transparency map. So down here at the bottom, there's a little square with a circle in it. When you make an adjustment layer, it already comes with a transparency map. That's this white square over on the right. And what that does is we can kind of draw on the transparency map and tell it where we want that layer to be visible, where we want it to be invisible. So let me do it on my image here just so you can see what I'm talking about. So if I click on Add Layer Mask, you can see it gets a white square just like the others. And then what I'll do is I'll get my brush tool, that one, this one. You can also get to the brush by hitting B on the keyboard. And then over on the left at the bottom, we also have the colors, the color swatches that are selected. So when you draw on a transparency layer, you only want to draw in grayscale. It'll only affect the transparency of the image in grayscale, meaning, from black to white. And that, let me just, right, I think black makes it invisible, yeah. So anywhere where I draw black on my adjustment layer, my layer disappears. And anywhere where I draw white, so I can toggle those by clicking the little arrows, it brings my image back. And the same is true for my adjustment layer. So if I go to my adjustment layer, And by the way, you can click on the layer or on the transparency map. So you can see up here I have different options. Down here, if I were to draw in black and white on my image, I actually just drew on my image, not on my transparency map, right? So that wouldn't that's a permanent adjustment. But anyway, so if I draw on my black and white here on the transparency map, so I've clicked it, you can tell by the brackets, and I draw in black, you can see that the areas that I've drawn in black are no longer black and white because they're no longer that they're not visible where I've drawn in black, and they're not affecting the image below that layer. So if I wanted to just edit the background, I can go to brightness and contrast, and I can kind of loosely trace out where my object is in black. And so anything I do now, if I go back, click on the layer rather than the transparency mask, you can see it's really only affecting the background, not the image itself, which is what we want. So when you're using the brush tool, I should have explained this. You can see up here in the top left, I can adjust the size of the brush. So you can see that makes it smaller, bigger, and also the hardness of the brush. And what that'll do is it'll make it, and I'm going to hold Alt on the keyboard and click on my transparency mask. So now I'm like looking at the transparency mask itself and not the image. So when I draw in with a softer edge, you can see it's going to give me kind of a gradual outline. Whereas if I turn the hardness up, it's going to give me like a harder outline. So that's how to adjust the brush. Hold Alt and click on it again to exit. So you can also adjust the brush by holding Alt on the keyboard, right click and drag your mouse left and right to change the size, drag it up and down to change the hardness. So that's kind of a shortcut. I think oh yeah, and then there's one other tip that you'll find really useful, depending on what your object is and what the background is, which is up here on the left. If you go to the magic wand tool, so most of these buttons, by the way, have a couple different tools underneath them. If you click and hold with the mouse, so you can see there's a lasso tool, a polygonal lasso tool, magnetic lasso tool. So these are all different kind of like selection tools. But if I click and hold on the magic wand tool, so the magic wand tool, if I go and I'll select my image itself, it's designed to make it easy to quickly select stuff. So if I click, and it's not going to be that useful for this image, but if I click on a particular color, so let's say I want to select just the darker stuff in my image. So I'll click on, the darker stuff there. And you can see that it's kind of selected everything that's, within a certain range, dark within my image. So if I delete my layer mask and make a new one with that selection active, you can see that it's mostly highlighted stuff that's dark. So that's what the oops, I didn't mean to do that. Applying it when I delete it. Anyway, so that's a quick way to select stuff. Say if you want to select a certain color and adjust it independently, or you want to, let's say your background is all blue and your object's all a different color, you can kind of quickly select stuff that way. It's not always going to do exactly what you want. So there's another tool that's really useful for cropping out an object from its background. And if I click and hold under the magic wand, there's this button called Quick Selection Tool. And this thing is kind of like a smart selection tool. And just like the brush, I can Alt, right click and drag. And I can make it harder, softer, bigger, smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag. And you can kind of see my little dotted line outline is pretty much kind of grabbing everything around where I click. Kind of hard to see, to be honest, because it's black and white. Let's turn those off for the moment. And so I'll just go in here and I'll kind of just roughly paint where I want my selection to go. And so like I can get that edge right there. And you'll notice that, when you click and drag and then let go, it'll kind of make little adjustments after you let go of the mouse. But anyway, so you can kind of just drag and zoom in on the edges if you want to get them a little bit sharper. Oops. So like right there, I just messed up and it started to select part of my shadow. In order to deselect stuff, I can hold Alt on the keyboard. You can see the little plus in the middle turn to a minus. And I removed all that stuff from my selection. I'll get all the stuff in here. Right. And oops. So anyway, so you can see that's a pretty quick and easy way, and it's quite good at selecting even, I have a relatively simple object on a relatively simple background, but it's pretty good at selecting, weird, complicated shapes in front of complicated backgrounds. So once I have a selection made, I can click on the little layer transparency mask to directly crop the image so you can see it's created a black and white outline from what I had selected. Or I can go, let's see, up at the top. So let's say I do that, but I'm not quite happy with how it looks. Like the edges aren't quite clean as I want, stuff like that. So let me undo. I can also click up at the top, select and mask. And this brings me into a new set of options where I can kind of adjust my selection. So if I adjust the radius there, you can see it kind of adjusts how fine-tuned that edge is. So it's a little more kind of gradated out. I can also like smooth the outline if I have a really that'll affect you more if you have a more complicated shape, but you can kind of smooth it. You can feather it more. So again, that's going to make the edge kind of soft, the transition from visible to invisible, more gradual versus more distinct, and all those sliders. So you can just kind of play around with those sliders and see if it's going to help you select just what you want to select. We can also increase, oops, oh, that's weird. We can also increase or decrease our selection. Anyway, so once you have the sliders where you want them, you click OK. And so now it's adjusted my selection to the options that I clicked when I hit select and mask. And so now when I crop it, it should have those effects. So for example, if I feathered it a bunch and then cropped it, you can see it has that same feathered effect. So that's a quick and easy way to select objects and kind of crop them, which you'll find yourself doing pretty often. So yeah, so just resize your images, play with the brightness, the contrast. So in here, these options, brightness, contrast levels, curves, and exposure, those will all be your options for adjusting like light and dark. These will be a lot of your options for adjusting color. So play around with that, get an image that you like that has good contrast and range, but is easy to understand, so it's not like too dark, too light. And resize it, crop it, and when you're done, click File, Save As. And what you want to do is always save, anytime you like edit a image like what we did, and we have a few different layers and adjustments, you always want to save a Photoshop file, because that's going to save also all these options that we've done. So if I click this and save it as a PSD Photoshop file, and I'll just click OK with all those dialogues that pop up after that. And then I also want to save it as a JPEG, because the JPEG is what I'll use when I actually put this image into my presentation. So I'll go to File, Save As again, and from the drop-down, I'll click JPEG. And then I'll rename this so I don't overwrite my original. Max out the quality and click OK. And so there you go. We have the original image and we have the edited Photoshopped image saved in my folder. All right, that's about it. Signing off.